we talked about strategy up top, right? How, it's so easily thrown around, but when it comes to brass tacks, nobody can really articulate what the strategy is or point to it up until very recently, Craig. I mean, the Department of Defense considered software a capability that goes along with a big hunk of metal, right? Nobody looked at software and AI and autonomy as a weapon in its own right. The biggest shift that's happening in front of us is that hunks of metal that explode or they drop things that explode are becoming secondary to software. I think it is the easiest thing in the world right now to get into the defense market. All that needs to happen is a CEO needs to wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to do this. But it is much harder than it ever has been to succeed in it.
Welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I am really happy to have my good friend, Gemmo Yesel with me. Gemmo is the founder, managing partner, leader, head sales guy for Bastion Atlas. Bastion Atlas focuses on the aerospace and defense business development arena. They do fractional sales for fractional BD for a variety of companies, and talk about the world today and the DoD and lots of great topics. So thanks, Gemma, for coming on.
Thanks for having me, sir. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
So we've known each other a long time now. It's fun.
That's right.
It's fun watching Bastion Atlas take off.
Well, I took off personally, partially due to you plucking me out of the crowd, Craig. So always appreciative, and I'm looking forward to the chat.
Well, it's all good. So what's going on in DoD business? What's going on in the DoD world right now? Lots of chaos with Doge. Whole world seems to be changing with drones, Ukraine, a lot of different focus.
Right.
What's your insights?
Well, everything's up in the air, right? I remember a while ago somebody said that the current DoD acquisition landscape is a graveyard of past mistakes, and that really resonated with me, right? And a different analogy I always use is the rubber band ball. We put it together, just before World War II, and it was working, and we discovered a couple of things that were broken. And instead of undoing the thing and fixing what's broken, we just kept slapping on new rubber bands, and now we have something so massive and so complex that the only way to attempt a good fix is to undo it all and almost start anew. So I think that's partially what we're seeing out there. So it's chaotic, right? I think the mindset is not particularly strategically driven, but it's a let's break it before we can build it approach. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But it's nearly impossible to see where it's all going. So, there are a lot of people out there looking for a crystal ball. They're looking for people who can tell them and show them, hey, here's what's going to happen. When in fact, in reality, nobody knows that, right? So I think in the shifting landscape from the business perspective, the trick is to stay nimble enough and agile enough and assess course of action 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And be ready for those outcomes, depending on where it all lands, when it lands. So you're right. The drone warfare, the autonomous world is taken up. Very heavy requirements on small businesses to carry back office burdens to sustain government contracts is starting to fade away. There is a very fortunate move away from cost plus contracts. There's a great appetite to rapidly adopt commercial technologies and implement them into the DoD space. All great ideas. How they're executed remains to be seen.
What are you telling companies? How are you telling companies to navigate a little bit? I mean, obviously you've got, the DoD, you got big program offices who are used to dealing with, slow, big, lumbering programs. And now all of a sudden it's tech, off the shelf. If this $100 component may work as well as the $10 million component, how are you telling companies to navigate the new world?
Right. That's an excellent question. It's $1 million question, right? Well, when you shift your focus on what I call small tech, right? These really fast moving small startups, they're very heavily engineering focused. And they have to be, right. It's all about product development, it's all about roadmaps, it's all about technical specifications, and a lot of people lose sight of the business end of things. So usually what I see is to penetrate the defense market, these folks go in and their pitches, their roadmaps, their arguments, and their vision for the future in the DoD space is very centric on the technical specifications of whatever they're building or whatever service they're providing. And it just doesn't land, it doesn't resonate, right? Because doing business in the DoD space is almost like doing business in a foreign language. It takes some getting used to, and it takes being able to communicate what it is that you have in that language. So being able to look at what's going on right now and frame your product or service in the context of a ops, right? In the context of an op order that may drop, and what may be lacking in that, what the gaps may be to go execute the mission, in the context of what the warfighter tells the DoD that they need. I think those are the nuances a lot of people miss.
How do you get your companies, your customers to reevaluate how they go about things? Yeah. Fast, agile, think not a year in advance, but modular, you know, replaceable, things that can be quickly up. How do you get your clients, to rethink that? And candidly, the second part of that question is the world going to go, does the world go from the big primes to small companies that are nimble and quick?
Yeah, I personally don't see it tipping completely in one direction or the other, right? I mean, if we take a step back, and I'll get back to your question, but I mean, let's face it, the world is arming back up. As a father and as a family man, that's a horrifying thing to witness, right? It's a dangerous place to be right now, but as a business in the defense space, that means there's a lot of activity, right? And the outcome of all that activity can be very hazardous if you don't know what you're doing, and it can be extremely productive if you know how to navigate it. So that's the tip of the pyramid, right? Like that's where you start from. And then the question is, which is what you asked, how do you get companies to get there? I think one of the hardest things you can do when you're running a small business is there are so many fires all around you, right? You're constantly worried about the problem, closest to you. You're worried about the next quarter. You're worried about the investors and your board of directors. And it feels dang near impossible to lift your head up and set your gaze a little closer to the horizon, if not on the horizon, right? So being able to surround yourself with experts in this space, and by the way, experts are a dime a dozen, right? Like there are a lot of retired generals and admirals and retired CEOs out there giving advice, but surrounding yourself with experts that have the trifecta of operational, technical, and executive expertise, and following their lead to pause for a second in the grand scheme of the chaos around you and determining what your strategy actually is one of the hardest things to do, but it's one of the most impactful things to do as well. And that's step one, right? I can't tell you how many potential clients I go in with, and I receive briefings on their capabilities, and I keep hearing, in alignment with our strategy, per our strategy, our strategy dictates. And I always ask the question, what is your strategy? And very rarely do I actually hear something that's coherent and tangible, right? And then I step back. I mean, it's funny, but it's true, and I'm sure you've been in that situation in the past too. And then you step back and you say, okay, forget about describing your strategy. Let's talk about what it is. right? Like, is it whatever the CEO says it is? Is it an email? Is it what's on your website, right? Like, what tangibly, what is this thing we call the strategy? Is it a document? And then there's another long pause, right? So, without being too long-winded, going back to your question, I think to step one is to take a step back and look at what's going on and tackle the strategy question in a way that's feasible, repeatable, and traceable. Can I actually, when I say I'm going to go to X, can I go back and verify I've actually done X? And has X actually contributed to my top level objectives, right? Can I repeat this over and over and over again and say that I have a strategy that works as my products evolve and my roadmaps grow? And oh, by the way, am I trying to dive too deep into the strategy game, considering how big my company is and what my resources are, right? There is such a thing called overkill. So we're not talking about something grand here, but that's what we focus on first.
I always loved it. It was funny. I used to get clients call me up and say, "Well, we want a DoD business development person, and we want them to bring us. We want to hire them, and we want them to bring results fast. They got to bring results fast." Yeah, and they're like, "Yeah, well, I'm not so sure about that." It's a thick gap between what you want and what's reality, right?
And I think it's because, a lot of people confuse going after all the business out there with going after a good business out there. And there's a big distinction, but I apologize. I interrupted you.
No, how you so talk about how you doing that? I mean, obviously you're in the fractional, you're the fractional BD space. You're out helping several small companies, um, promote, be visible to the DoD or the prime contractors, or how are you going out and how are you attacking the market such that you can get visibility and results? I mean, it's a lot of investment people have to put up front when they want to go sell to the DoD, with a lot of friction between. How does a company go out and attack that market?
Right. And I think you're asking that question from the framework of our clients and not necessarily, a company like ours. So um, to expand on what you said, right, at Bastion Atlas, what we do is in the aerospace and defense space, we do consulting, some traditional consulting, but a majority of what we do is exactly what you said, fractional business development. We act as an extension of our clients' sales and BD teams, right? So not only do we offer advice and point the way and make some warm intros, but we roll up our sleeves, get in the dirt with our clients and go execute for them. So that's the business model. Now, going back to how we tackle the market, we talked about strategy up top, right? How it's so easily thrown around, but when it comes to brass tacks, nobody can really articulate what the strategy is or point to it. Hey, here's our strategy. Here's where it lives. And you can go, read it or see it for yourself. Business cases are the same way, right? There's a shocking lack of interest and focus on and knowledge of building a positive business case out there, especially in the small business world and especially in the small tech world. So when we go in with our clients and we talk about tackling the market space on their behalf, one of the first questions we ask is, what is good business? What is good business for this company? Um, we rarely get analytical results. So when you dive deeper, right, what describes good business? Well, good business is one that'll bring you long-term, predictable, recurring revenue. So when you're forecasting, you're not flipping the coin quarter to quarter, and you project forward 1, 3, 5 years. You can predict what's going to happen with about 65% accuracy, and then the ball game becomes about the remaining 35%. The second piece in that puzzle is, yeah, it would be fantastic if I'm a startup to go land this $20 million contract, right? And everybody gets distracted by the shiny object and all resources get diverted there. But if that $20 million contract is going to tie up my engineering resources for the next 3 years, while we're going and pursuing other things that may bring less top line, but potentially more bottom line with shared resources and over a longer time period. That's a decision we need to be able to make, right? So we talked about the strategy piece, we talked about good business, and now we're talking about smart business cases. And the last part, of course, is in this day and age that we live in, sales has become a bit of a transaction, right? And companies that turn sales into a strategic advantage are the ones that come out on top in the long term. And very few people rely on some old school measures like being on the road, being in person, being at your customer's location. Nothing replaces being across the table and looking eye to eye. Nothing to this day. I don't care where AI is at, where Zoom is at. Absolutely nothing, right? And people who forget that do so at their own peril. So there's a lot to say about this, but I do want to keep it concise.
I would think in your world, a lot of your customers, they want less the transactional and they want more the strategic. They want to know that they continually come to you over and over and over again, or at least you're somebody who's got the answers from a macro standpoint if they call.
That's it. That's it. I mean, people say they want that, right? But when it comes to practice, it's easier said than done, right? When it comes to execution, a lot of companies in this space are not built for it, and that requires a little bit of transformation. So yes, we want to scale. Yes, we want to grow. Yes, we want more revenue, but you want to scale with strategic intent so that your growth is sustainable, right? A lot of people miss that. And for the purposes of my company, um, I think, and this is just me, the one of the major keys to success, counterintuitively, is replaceable, right? If you try to make a client reliant on you for the long term, I think it's going to backfire, right? So in most cases, we step in and we, like I said, get in the dirt and do hit the road and do the work with and for our clients. But we always offer an off ramp. We'll have the machine cranking for them, right? We'll hand it over. We'll train them, and you can't get rid of us. And shockingly, I know you'll be shocked by this, right? Uh, Nobody gets rid of us because we make ourselves replaceable, not irreplaceable. So it matters. I think old school genuinely matters, and intentions matter in this business, and any business, but especially in this defense business that we're in.
Is the DoD and your customer, are they, obviously, events last week in Russia with drones. I just, I did a podcast with a four-star Air Force General, Glenn Van Herk. He's talking about, hey, look, homeland defense. And then we talk about cyber. Then we talk about Yemen and how we're using $1 million missiles to blow up $1,000 drones. Do you find that there's a lot of shiny objects? Are people starting to chase? Is there becoming like this? What's the word I want to look to? Yeah, this frantic mentality where everybody feels like they now have to start chasing everything. And is there a way to focus them down into little buckets and go, hey, look, anti-drone, cyber, yeah, things of the sort. It's like, hey, look, let's just break it down into little buckets so that we're not just chasing everything or feeling like we need to chase everything.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I don't know if I have a good answer for you, but I'll think my way through it with you if that's okay, right?
No,
So uh, I, I think part of what's going on is everybody knows point B of what they want, right? They just don't know where they're at, and they're not exactly sure how squiggly the path is from point A to point B. That's the challenge, right? So it's really about defining, okay, where are we at right now? There are varying levels of readiness, and there's no readiness, right? That, God forbid, if what happened in Russia last week happened, here. I don't want to speak out of turn, but we're just not prepared, right? And we're not going to be prepared anytime soon. So yes, point B is clear. Point A less so. The line in between them even less so. So what ends up happening? The market space gets flooded with buzzwords, right? And
Mhm.
if you get emails every day that with something that says urgent, you become desensitized to the word urgent, and you start dropping those emails off your cross check, right?
Mhm.
So the more people start talking about economy and AI, I'm sorry, autonomy and AI pilots and drones, the more the customers' eyes start glazing over these days. That's a challenge, and it's the danger, right? Now, and when I told you I may not have a good answer, that's where it gets murky. How do you overcome that,
Yeah.
right? Not exactly sure yet, but here's what I am seeing, right? So everything we're talking about right now in this segment of the conversation used to be somewhat on the fringes, right? And they got delegated to the innovation market in the DoD. And what did we do, right? Instead of centralizing it, we created 50 different innovation offices, under each department of service, and it became an insurmountable mess in its own right. And the funding was uneven, application requirements were unclear. When a company gets selected for funding, how if there's a path to actual production level contracts was very ambiguous, and we made a mess of it, right? So
Mhm.
something I am seeing is that these capabilities are now moving up into the mainstream, right? Which is a good thing. So now you're actually talking about prime level contacts and the undersecretaries of defense and the deputy secretaries of the different services about these capabilities. And now the DoD is looking at each and every one of these things and categorizing them or attempting to categorize them as major weapon systems, right? That's huge, and that's the solution. That's the big picture of the solution. When you break that into smaller problems to solve one at a time, so you can solve a bigger problem, that's where it's still a little ambiguous. But up until very recently, Craig, I mean, the Department of Defense considered software a capability that goes along with a big hunk of metal, right? Nobody looked at software and AI and autonomy as a weapon in its own right.
Mhm.
And I think that is when I told you I was going to think my way through it with you, I guess I meant it, huh? This is turning into a whole thing. But the biggest shift that's happening in front of us is that hunks of metal that explode or they drop things that explode are becoming secondary to software and autonomy, which is now the major weapon system.
Mhm.
And that's where all the answers lie. And we can expand it further if you'd like. If you have additional thoughts.
So let's talk about your background a little bit. Let's shift the focus a little bit. MIT, Air Force,
Right.
MIT grad, aerospace engineer from MIT,
Sure.
Air Force pilot,
Right.
moved on to avionics.
Yes, sir.
And as far as what Bastion Atlas is doing, how are you using your background, from hey, look, you understand the tech, you understand the products. Yeah. Tell me about how Bastion Atlas is bringing like process. I take it there's no matter what you're doing or what your companies are, there's a process to success versus, hey, let's go chase, every shiny little object or whatever else. Yeah. What's the process?
Okay. So there's a few things in that question. So my background, you're absolutely right. Went to MIT, studied engineering, became an Air Force pilot simultaneously, almost simultaneously. Started my civilian career as an engineer, right? A majority of my 20-year Air Force career was in the Guard Reserve system, so I was part-time. I was able to get myself a big boy job, and I started my career at a Fortune 500 company doing avionics engineering, and then shifted toward the business side of things, and the rest is history. Now, um, regarding my own personal background, and this does pertain to your question about Bastion, you always hear, do what you're passionate about. That's where fulfillment is. That's the greatest happiness in the world, right? In my older years, I started taking exception to that, right? I think that's very bad advice. I think discovering and doing what you're really, really, really good at is where true happiness lies, right? Professional fulfillment wise.
Mhm.
That's what I mean. And for what you're good at happens to be what you're passionate about even better. So yes, I studied engineering. I became an Air Force pilot. I was a structured, solid engineer, but I was by no means the best
Mhm.
out there, nor was I the best student at MIT. became a pilot, I was a smart pilot. I was a safe pilot, but I was not God's gift to aviation, right? I did not have hands of gold, but I was safe and I deployed and, I've been in combat situations and I held my own. Um, but I eventually discovered that the business space, right, the executive decision-making space is what I'm really, really, really good at. And interestingly enough, had I not taken the engineering and aviation path, I probably wouldn't have been as good at the business side, but that's a different chicken or egg kind of story. So that's where Bastion Atlas came from, right? It came from the vision that we're going to assemble an elite team of individuals with, as I said earlier, operational, technical, and executive experience to go deliver perspective, reach, and scale for an exclusive subset of global clients. So that's where it all came from. Now, where it's going process-wise, you nailed it, right? I mean, you kind of led the witness a little bit with your question, but you're spot on. So I have to latch onto it. The biggest mistake a lot of our clients make is they try to go after everything, and they end up with nothing. Right, and they confuse the number of meetings or the number of activity that passes their inbox on any given day with results, which they're not. So again, kind of connecting the dots from the earlier part of our conversation, I think being methodical about what it is you're trying to accomplish, translating that into a concise, feasible, repeatable, traceable strategy, taking the time to assemble the right team and figuring out what good business is for your company, and then having the right people to go execute that good business in alignment with your executive team. That's the process. And I think that's best. That's the best I'll be able to articulate it for you today.
When your clients are bringing you in, do they understand that that's the process, or are they kind of like, show us the way, or we're a little, what's that first conversation look like typically?
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at how grounded and realistic people are, right? And we are very selective with who we work with. And a majority of first conversations we have are very receptive to these things. And usually, we have 2-3 meetings before a client signs us on. And I shouldn't say all the time, but in most cases, I refuse to sign the dotted line until there's an in-person interaction. And we discuss these things thoroughly. And if there's a difference in vision, then we are probably not the right solution for that company, because we are very, very good at what we do. We are extremely confident in our ability to do what we set out to do, but it requires a lot of trust. It requires some corporate patience, because quick results are not sustainable results. So to answer your question, yes, they understand what they're getting into, and if they don't, then the working relationship doesn't start.
Is there a typical client, like demographic? Is it 30, 40, $50 million companies, $100 million companies with products, or is it what's it kind of look like?
I appreciate you asking that. That came up in an internal all hands team meeting yesterday. We were onboarding a new team member, and everybody was on the call. And as I was telling the new team member about the company, and I said, "Look, I'll come clean, right? There is no ideal or set client profile, because Craig, we're all over the place. I'll be the first to admit it, right? Like we have a Fortune 500 company, tens of billions of dollars a year, right? I probably shouldn't mention names." And we have a 2-person startup that just raised $10 million and started by signing us on. So we're all over the map. And yesterday on the team meeting, I presented that almost as a negative, where there's a bit of an identity crisis in the client portfolio. My team actually pushed back and they said, "No, that's our strength. You never want to use that, right? You never want those client profiles to converge into a blob in the middle." And I spent some time last night thinking about that, and I think they're right. So to answer your question, no, there isn't an ideal or set client profile. We do work with startups all the way up to large cap Fortune 500 organizations, And the model is shockingly similar. We obviously the execution is different, but the strategic intent and mindset behind working with these folks is convergent in more ways than you'd think.
I love it. So, kind of wide variety of customers. Is it more like highly technical products? You talk about startups, highly technical products, or is it stuff that's been out there for a long range, or is it everything in between?
Yeah, it's varied. We do have clients that have legacy products, such as avionics and mission computers, GPS cards, etc. Right? We have clients with highly sophisticated emerging technology, AI. For example, AI swarm pilots. Right? We have capabilities that take a written upward, say by the U.S. Army, and immediately convert that into course of action, war game it, a million times, and spit out the analytics and let the services pick out the best course of action. And we have things in between, like airframe and engine tooling for helicopters and aircraft. So very, very diverse set of capabilities in terms of personnel size, revenue, and technology. We even have some clients that are in the services business.
Is getting into the DoD space, with is it becoming more challenging a little? Is it becoming a little bit more challenging as the Pentagon is starting to look at more and more stuff, or is it kind of is it this, that's I guess my question is with more and more threats, more and more technology, you know, is it becoming harder to become a player and get noticed?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because maybe that should have been the first question in this
Could have
chat,
been, yeah.
right? Because it drives everything else. So, I mean, I think I have a pretty direct answer for you. I think it is the easiest thing in the world right now to get into the defense market. All that needs to happen is a CEO needs to wake up one morning and say, "Oh, I think I'm going to do this," right?
Mhm.
Um, but it is much harder than it ever has been to succeed in it. And I think a lot of people, when they make that decision, because the barrier to entry from a marketing perspective or a framing perspective is so low these days, um, if you make that decision lightly, it can very easily become a death sentence for a company. So much easier to get into, much harder to succeed in, and very, very risky to endeavor in without proper guidance and talent.
How many people on your team
Seven.
and their backgrounds?
Very similar to mine. They each have the operational, technical, and executive experience. We look for people like me. I mean, I always say I was born into the defense industry, right? As a professional being, I was literally just born into this market. So everyone on our team, with one exception, the gentleman who's running the back office, right? He's kind of the puppet master behind all of us, while all of us are out there executing the business. But we have all been military officers. We've all worn the uniform, seen our share of combat. We have we all have a technical background. We have all studied engineering or something technical, and we have all been in positions of executive authority. That's the profile, and we'll never deviate from that.
That's fantastic. So it's a 7-person team of experts,
That's right.
technical focus.
That's right.
You talk to the engineers, talking to the BD.
That's right. That's right. And I'll tell you something else, right? I mean, I'm learning as I go. I mean, when we take meetings with potential new clients, I always tell them that, if I tell them I have it all figured out, I'd be lying to them, right? So I'm figuring out very quickly, though, that in the consulting space, and fractional BD is emerging right now, but I think it's taken over the consulting role, right? I think traditional consulting is gradually fading, and the fractional model is taking its place, but that's probably a whole separate conversation. I think in this consulting space, the best consultants and the best consulting companies are the ones that entered the space inadvertently. I genuinely believe that, right? I never set out to do this, right? Like I honestly left my last job. I had another job offer, which I thought I was going to go take and do. People approached me with some ideas and thoughts, and And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take my full-time income, and instead of it all coming from a single employer, I'm just going to distribute it to several employers, and it'll keep things fresh. It'll keep things interesting. I'll be more fulfilled. It was never meant to be more than a one-person operation. And God knows it was never meant to be consulting, right? It was just supposed to be fractional BD. And it's been a little bit like falling down the up escalator, right? Like you just keep falling, and at some point you just fall off altogether, and you just dust yourself off, and you go, "Oh, I was supposed to be here all along."
Welcome to entrepreneurship, right?
That's right, sir. That's right. So it all happened very quickly. We went from just me with 2 clients in 6 months to 11 clients on 4 countries across 3 continents and growing. So knock on wood, we won't take our foot off the gas. We won't get complacent, but it's been a rapid transformation for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's stop with there. How do folks get a hold of Bastion Atlas?
The easiest pathway is bastionatlas.com, our website. And all the other means to contact us are right there on the website. We are on LinkedIn. I'm personally on LinkedIn. I'm sure you release my information now with the podcast. And we're always excited to have a conversation.
We'll put it in the show notes too. Gemma, thanks for coming on. Love what you're doing. Love your success. It's been fun to watch.
Thank you for everything, Craig. Great chatting.